The story of an orphan who shared her lunch with a hungry man, who was actually a king in disguise, began on a bitter winter morning in the forgotten corners of Westbrook City. Mia Bennett clutched her worn coat tighter around her thin frame as she hurried through the busy streets, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. At 17, she had spent most of her life bouncing between foster homes and orphanages, learning early that kindness was a rare currency in a world that seemed designed to break her. The Westbrook Children's Home had been her residence for the past 8 months. Not her home, never her home. Home implied warmth, safety, belonging. The orphanage was merely walls and rules and the constant reminder that she was unwanted. But Mia had developed a quiet resilience, a stubborn flame of hope that refused to be extinguished despite the harsh winds of circumstance. Every day, she walked 4 blocks to the small bakery where she worked before and after school. Mrs. Abernathy, the owner, had taken a chance on her 6 months ago, the first person in years to look at Mia and see potential rather than burden. The pay was minimal, but the dignity of earning her own way meant everything. "Good morning, dear." Mrs. Abernathy called as the bell above the door announced Mia's arrival. The warm scent of fresh bread embraced her, a momentary shelter from the cold. "You're early today." Mia unwound her threadbare scarf, her fingers stiff from the cold. "Thought I'd get a head start on the morning rush." The truth was simpler. The orphanage grew colder at night than during the day, and sleep had abandoned her hours before dawn. Better to be productive in the warmth of the bakery than to lie shivering under thin blankets, counting the hours until morning. Mrs. Abernathy's eyes softened with understanding. Without comment, she slid a warm cheese roll across the counter. "Eat this while you're putting on your apron. You're looking too thin." Mia wanted to refuse. Pride was often her only possession, but hunger won out. She took small, careful bites, savoring each morsel. At lunch, she would have the sandwich she had made from yesterday's leftover bread and a small apple she had saved from dinner. Not much, but it was hers, earned by her own hands. The morning passed in a flurry of customers and the comforting rhythm of work. By noon, Mia's arms ached pleasantly from kneading dough, and flour dusted her dark hair like premature snow. Mrs. Abernathy insisted she take her lunch break despite the continuing stream of customers. "Go on, get some fresh air," she urged, practically pushing Mia toward the door. 30 minutes. The world won't end if you take a moment for yourself. Outside, the winter sun hung weakly in the sky, offering light but little warmth. Mia walked to the small park across the street, finding her usual bench, partially sheltered by evergreen trees and facing away from the street. Here, she could pretend for half an hour that she belonged somewhere, that the park was her garden, and she was simply taking a moment's respite from a busy but fulfilling life. She unwrapped her sandwich slowly, breathing in the simple scent of bread and cheese. A luxury in its way. She had just taken her first bite when movement caught her eye. A man stood at the park entrance, his tall frame stooped as if carrying an invisible weight. His clothes were oddly mismatched, expensive shoes worn down at the heels, a once fine coat now frayed at the cuffs. Not homeless, Mia thought, but something else. Lost, perhaps. There was a dignity in his bearing that contradicted his disheveled appearance. Their eyes met across the distance. Something in his gaze, a profound weariness, a familiar loneliness resonated with her. He quickly looked away, embarrassed to be caught staring, and moved to a bench on the far side of the park. Mia returned to her sandwich, taking another small bite. But the man's presence nagged at her awareness. She watched from the corner of her eye as he sat with empty hands, gazing at nothing. His shoulders curved inward against the cold, and occasionally his hand moved to his stomach in that universal gesture of hunger. She knew that feeling intimately, the hollow ache that began as discomfort and grew into a gnawing emptiness that made it hard to think of anything else. She had experienced it often enough in homes where food was either scarce or withheld as punishment. Before she could second-guess herself, Mia stood, gathering her meager lunch. The walk across the park felt longer than it should have, each step an argument with herself. This was foolish. The sandwich and apple were all she would have until dinner. She needed the energy for her afternoon shift. And yet, the man looked up as her shadow fell across him, surprise flashing across his weathered face. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, not old, but aged by experience. His eyes were a startling blue, intelligent and somehow familiar, though she was certain they had never met. "Excuse me," Mia said, her voice smaller than she intended. "Would you like to share my lunch? It's not much, but..." She held out half her sandwich and the apple, the offering suspended between them like a question. For a moment he simply stared at her hand, his expression unreadable. Mia felt heat rise to her cheeks. Of course. She had misread the situation. He probably wasn't hungry at all, just resting. Now she looked foolish, pitying someone who hadn't asked for her pity. She began to withdraw her hand when his fingers, long-fingered and surprisingly clean, gently caught her wrist. "Why?" he asked, his voice rich and deep despite its softness. "Why would you share with a stranger?" The question seemed weighted with more importance than it should have carried. Mia shrugged, uncomfortable with the scrutiny. "Because you look hungry," she said simply. "And I know what that feels like." Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or something deeper. He accepted the half sandwich with both hands, the gesture oddly formal, almost reverential. "Thank you," he said, the words carrying the gravity of a vow. "May I ask your name?" "Mia," she answered, settling cautiously beside him on the bench, maintaining a respectful distance. "Mia Bennett." "James," he replied after a slight hesitation. "Just James, no surname offered." He took a careful bite of the sandwich, chewing thoughtfully. They ate in companionable silence, watching pigeons peck at invisible crumbs on the frozen ground. There was something peaceful about sharing space with a stranger who asked nothing of her, no explanations, no performance of gratitude or happiness that the group homes always seemed to require. "Do you come here often?" he finally asked, breaking the quiet. Mia nodded. "Every day at lunch. I work at the bakery." She gestured toward Abernathy's with its cheerful blue awning. "Ah," he said, "that explains the flour." He pointed to her hair with a small smile. Self-consciously, she brushed at her dark locks, sending a small cloud of white dust into the air between them. His smile deepened, revealing a single dimple in his right cheek. The expression transformed his face, erasing years of care and revealing glimpses of a younger, perhaps happier man. "What about you?" she asked. "I haven't seen you here before." His smile faded slightly. "I'm between places at the moment, trying to figure some things out." The vague answer should have raised her suspicions. Life had taught Mia to be wary of adults with secrets, but something in his manner suggested not danger, but vulnerability. He was hiding something, certainly, but not, she thought, with malicious intent. "Well," she said, rising as she checked her watch, "I should get back to work, Mrs. Abernathy will need help with the afternoon rush." He stood as well, his height more apparent now. "Thank you for sharing your lunch, Mia Bennett. It was the kindest thing anyone has done for me in quite some time." The gravity of his thanks seemed disproportionate to the small gesture, but Mia merely nodded, suddenly shy. "Maybe I'll see you tomorrow," she offered, surprising herself with the invitation. "Perhaps you will," he replied, his blue eyes warming. "Until then." She felt his gaze on her back as she walked away, a strange mix of emotions swirling within her, curiosity, caution, and something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. When she returned to the bakery, Mrs. Abernathy raised an eyebrow at her half-eaten lunch but said nothing. The afternoon passed in a blur of customers and tasks, but Mia's thoughts kept returning to the man in the park. James. Just James. There was a story there, she was certain. Everyone had one, especially those who seemed reluctant to share it. That night, lying in her narrow bed at the orphanage, listening to the breathing of 11 other girls in the dormitory-style room, Mia replayed their brief interaction. It had been nice to talk to someone who didn't know her history, who didn't look at her with either pity or wariness. Just a simple human connection, ephemeral but real. She didn't really expect to see him again. Life had taught her that people rarely stayed. They drifted in and out like seasons, leaving footprints that the next snow would cover. Still, as she drifted toward sleep, she found herself hoping. The next day dawned even colder than the last, with threatening clouds hanging low over the city. Mia arrived at the bakery with her hands numb despite her gloves, grateful for the wall of warmth that greeted her when she stepped inside. Mrs. Abernathy was already elbow-deep in dough, her round face flushed from exertion. "Morning, love. Could you start on the display case? We've got those charity breakfast orders to fill by 9. Mia nodded, falling easily into the familiar routine. By lunchtime, her lower back ached from standing, but satisfaction warmed her from within. They had managed the morning rush and the special orders without a hitch. "Take a full hour today, Mrs. Abernathy insisted when Mia reached for her coat at noon. "You worked through your break yesterday." "But no arguments. And take this." She pressed a paper bag into Mia's hands. "Fresh soup and a roll. It's too cold for those skimpy sandwiches you bring." Mia's throat tightened with emotion she couldn't express. "Thank you," she managed, the words inadequate for the feelings behind them. Outside, fat snowflakes had begun to fall, dusting the world in pristine white. Mia hesitated at the bakery door, squinting toward the park. In this weather, it would be sensible to eat inside, perhaps in the bakery's small back room. But a familiar figure sat on the bench where they had shared lunch yesterday, shoulders hunched against the cold, seemingly oblivious to the snow accumulating on his shoulders. Before she could reconsider, Mia was crossing the street, her steps careful on the increasingly slippery sidewalk. James looked up at her approach, surprise and what might have been pleasure brightening his eyes. "You came back," he said, brushing snow from the space beside him in invitation. "So did you," she countered, settling next to him and opening her bag. The rich aroma of vegetable soup wafted between them. "Have you been waiting long?" "You're covered in snow." He shrugged, a casual gesture at odds with his formal bearing. "Time passes differently when you have nowhere particular to be." The melancholy in his voice tugged at something in Mia's chest. "Here," she said, offering him the roll from her bag. "I've got soup too. We can share." He started to protest, but she cut him off. "It's too much for me anyway. Mrs. Abernathy always gives me extra." This wasn't entirely true, but the lie came easily. She had gone hungry often enough to recognize its shadow in others. They passed the soup container back and forth, sharing the warmth and nourishment as snow continued to fall around them, creating a hushed bubble of privacy in the otherwise public park. "Tell me about yourself, Mia Bennett," James said after they had eaten in silence for several minutes. Mia stiffened slightly. This was usually where casual interactions soured, when people learned she was an orphan, their expressions changing to pity or, worse, uncomfortable curiosity about what had happened to her parents. "Not much to tell," she hedged. "I work at the bakery. I go to Westbrook High. I like reading when I can find the time." "And where is home?" he asked, his gaze steady. The question, innocent enough, landed like a stone in still water, ripples of discomfort spreading through her. She focused on the half-empty soup container, suddenly fascinated by a floating carrot. "The Westbrook Children's Home," she finally answered, her voice carefully neutral. "For now, anyway." Understanding dawned in his eyes, but to her surprise, his expression didn't change to the usual pity or awkwardness. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. "So you know what it's like," he said quietly, "to be adrift." The simple acknowledgement, recognition without judgment, loosened something in Mia's chest. "Yes," she admitted. "I do." "How long?" he asked, his question gentle, leaving space for her to refuse. "My whole life, more or less. My mother died when I was 3. I don't remember her. Never knew my father." The facts, delivered without emotion, like reading from someone else's biography. "I've been in 7 different foster homes and 3 group facilities. Westbrook is just the latest stop." She waited for the usual platitudes, how sorry he was, how strong she must be, how things would surely get better. Instead, James was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "People often speak of home as a place," he finally said, "but I've come to believe it's more a feeling, a sense of belonging that has little to do with walls and roofs." The observation struck Mia as both profound and somehow personal, as if he were speaking from experience rather than philosophy. "And have you found it?" she asked. "That feeling of home?" A shadow crossed his face. "I had it once. I'm trying to find my way back." Snow continued to fall around them, muffling the city sounds. In this cocoon of white, it seemed possible to share truths normally kept hidden. "What about you?" Mia asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "You said you're between places. What does that mean exactly?" James brushed snow from his sleeve, his movements deliberate, buying time. "I made mistakes," he said finally. "Decisions I thought were right at the time, but—" He shook his head. "I lost sight of what mattered. Now I'm trying to understand what's real again." It wasn't really an answer, but Mia sensed it was as much truth as he could offer. There was pain there and regret, emotions she recognized intimately. "Is that why you're sitting alone in a park in the snow?" she asked. "To figure out what's real?" A smile flickered across his face. "Something like that?" The church bells from St. Mary's rang out, startling Mia. 1 o'clock. Her break was over. "I have to go," she said, gathering the empty soup container. "Mrs. Abernathy will be wondering where I am." James nodded, rising with her. "Thank you for the soup." "And the company." Mia hesitated, then blurted out, "Will you be here tomorrow?" The question hung between them, revealing more vulnerability than she had intended. But James didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he didn't mind. "Yes," he said simply. "I'll be here." And he was. The next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Each lunchtime they met on the same bench, sharing whatever Mia brought, sometimes her own simple fare, sometimes Mrs. Abernathy's more generous offerings, which seemed to increase as the days passed, as if the older woman somehow knew Mia was sharing. Their conversations ranged widely: books they had read, places they had been, abstract questions about life and purpose. James never directly explained his situation, and Mia never directly asked, but through the fragments he shared, she began to piece together a story. A man of privilege who had become disillusioned with his life, who had walked away from responsibilities that had begun to feel hollow. For his part, James listened to Mia's experiences with genuine interest: her struggles in the foster system, her dreams of someday becoming a teacher, her determination to build a life of meaning despite the obstacles. He never dismissed her ambitions as childish or unrealistic, as adults often did. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions and offered perspectives that challenged her to think more deeply. 2 weeks into their unusual friendship, as they shared a thermos of hot chocolate on their bench, now cleared of snow but still cold, James asked a question that caught Mia off guard. "What would you do, Mia, if you could do anything? If all limitations, money, opportunity, circumstance were removed?" Mia's first instinct was to repeat her standard answer: become a teacher, find a small apartment of her own, build a quiet, stable life. But something in James's expression made her pause, made her look beyond the practical dreams she had allowed herself. "I'd travel," she said slowly, surprising herself with the truth that emerged. "I'd see mountains and oceans and ancient cities. I'd learn how people live all over the world." She smiled self-consciously. "And then I'd come back and be a teacher, but I'd have all these experiences to share with my students." James nodded, his eyes alight with something that might have been approval. "The wider your perspective, the more you have to offer others," he agreed. "It's a worthy ambition." "What about you?" she countered. "If you could do anything?" His expression grew distant, contemplative. "I would build something lasting," he said finally. "Something that helps people find their way when they're lost. A lighthouse of sorts." Before Mia could ask what he meant, a sleek black car pulled up at the park's entrance, its engine purring quietly. James's posture changed immediately, shoulders straightening, jaw tightening. A man in a dark suit emerged from the driver's side, his gaze scanning the park until it landed on their bench. "I have to go," James said, rising abruptly. "I'm sorry. Is everything okay?" Mia asked, alarmed by the sudden change. "Yes, just..." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pressed something into her hand. "I might not be here tomorrow, but I'll come back if I can." Before she could respond, he was striding away, meeting the suited man at the park entrance. They spoke briefly, the man's posture deferential despite James's shabby appearance. Then both disappeared into the car, which glided away as smoothly as it had arrived. Mia looked down at her hand. A smooth riverstone rested on her palm, polished to a soft gleam. On one side, a single word had been carved in elegant script: "Remember." James didn't return the next day, or the day after that. On the third day, Mia sat alone on their bench, the stone clutched in her pocket, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest. Foolish to feel abandoned by someone she barely knew, someone who had never promised anything. And yet, "He's not coming back, is he?" She asked the empty air, her breath forming clouds in the cold. "Looking for your friend?" Mrs. Abernathy's voice startled her. The older woman stood at the edge of the bench, holding 2 steaming cups. She offered one to Mia, who accepted it gratefully. "How did you know?" Mrs. Abernathy settled beside her with a sigh. "I have windows in my shop, dear. I've seen you two talking these past weeks." She sipped her drink, tea by the smell of it. "Seemed like serious conversations for a park bench in winter." Mia nodded, wrapping her cold fingers around the warm cup. "He was different. Easy to talk to." Mrs. Abernathy's tone was non-committal. "Do you know who he is?" The question caught Mia off guard. "His name is James. He's going through something, I think. Trying to figure things out." Mrs. Abernathy made a sound that might have been amusement. That's one way of putting it. She reached into her coat pocket and extracted a folded newspaper, opening it to reveal a front-page article. This was in yesterday's paper. Mia took the newspaper, her eyes widening as they fell on the headline, "King James IV returns after month-long disappearance." Below it was a photograph that made her heart stutter. James, her James, dressed in a formal suit, his posture regal, his expression solemn. "This can't be," she whispered, scanning the article with growing disbelief. The story outlined how the king of a small but wealthy European nation called Adravane had disappeared from his royal duties a month ago, prompting international concern. He had apparently been on a personal retreat, according to palace officials, though rumors suggested he had been traveling incognito to reconnect with ordinary citizens after years of increasing isolation in the palace. "He's a king?" Mia's voice sounded distant to her own ears. "All this time I've been sharing my lunch with a king?" Mrs. Abernathy patted her hand gently. "It seems you have, dear. And from what I observed, he valued that simple kindness more than you know." Mia's mind raced through their conversations, seeing them in a new light. His formal bearing, his thoughtful questions, his perspectives that sometimes seemed to come from a place of unusual responsibility, it all made a strange kind of sense now. But why had he sought her company? Why share those cold park lunches when he could have been doing whatever it was kings did? "I don't understand," she said finally. Mrs. Abernathy's expression softened. "Sometimes people in positions of power lose touch with what matters. Perhaps he needed to remember what real connection feels like." She stood, adjusting her scarf. "Come back to the shop when you're ready. Take your time." Alone again, Mia reread the article, trying to reconcile the James she knew with King James IV of Adravane. According to the paper, he had inherited the throne at 25 after his father's unexpected death and had spent the last decade modernizing the small kingdom's economy and education system. He was respected but somewhat remote, known for his intellect but rarely seen outside official functions. Until now. Mia pulled the stone from her pocket, running her thumb over the carved word. Remember, had he given it to her as a memento? A final goodbye before returning to his real life? The thought brought an unexpected ache. Their friendship, brief as it was, had meant something to her, a rare connection in a life marked by transience. But of course it had been temporary. He was a king. She was a nobody, an orphan with no family, no connections, no real place in the world. She pocketed the stone and stood, gathering her dignity around her like a cloak. Life had taught her how to move on. This would be no different. A week passed, then two. January gave way to February, bringing slightly longer days but no decrease in the winter chill. Mia threw herself into her work at the bakery and her studies at school, pushing thoughts of James, King James, to the back of her mind. She still took her lunch breaks at the park when weather permitted, but she chose a different bench now. The old one held too many memories, too many conversations that now seemed like a strange dream. Mrs. Abernathy watched her with concerned eyes but asked no questions, simply ensuring Mia had warm meals and occasional extra shifts when the bakery was busy. The routine was comforting. Wake, work, school, work again, sleep, repeat. No space for dwelling on what might have been. Then, on a particularly bitter Thursday in mid-February, the bell above the bakery door chimed just as Mia was preparing to close for the evening. She looked up from the display case she was cleaning, a polite dismissal ready on her lips. They were closed after all, but the words died in her throat. James stood in the doorway, snowflakes melting on the shoulders of a coat far more elegant than the one he had worn during their park meetings. His hair was neatly trimmed, his posture straight, but his eyes, those were the same, blue and searching and somehow both confident and vulnerable at once. "Hello, Mia," he said quietly. Mrs. Abernathy appeared from the back room, took one look at the tableau, and discreetly disappeared again, the swinging door to the kitchen closing behind her with a soft thud. "Your Majesty," Mia said stiffly, the formal address feeling strange on her tongue. She continued wiping down the display case, avoiding his gaze. "Please don't," he said, his voice pained. "Not from you." Mia looked up then, anger and hurt and confusion swirling within her. "What should I call you then? James? Is that even your real name?" "It is," he said, taking a step forward. "James Edward Thomas Aldridge. But no one has called me just James in, I can't remember how long." "Why didn't you tell me?" The question burst from her, sharp with betrayal. "All those conversations, all those lunches, was it some kind of game? Slumming with the commoners for a few weeks?" Pain flashed across his face. No, never that. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made her heart twist. I needed to remember what it was like to be seen as a person, not a position. To connect with someone who didn't want anything from me except conversation. So you lied. I omitted, he corrected gently. I never claimed to be anyone other than James, a man trying to find his way back to what matters. Mia set down her cloth, suddenly tired. Why are you here? Shouldn't you be back in your palace or whatever, doing king things? A smile flickered at the corner of his mouth. King things. Yes, I have many of those to do. The smile faded, replaced by seriousness. But I couldn't leave things as they were between us. Not after everything. Everything? We shared a few lunches, talked on a park bench. It's hardly everything. Even to her own ears, the words sounded brittle, defensive. James stepped closer, his gaze intent. You shared your food when you had little to spare. You listened without judgment. You showed me kindness with no expectation of return. His voice softened. In a world where every interaction I have is colored by my title, that is everything, Mia. The sincerity in his voice chipped at her anger, but confusion remained. So you came to say goodbye properly? Thank you, mission accomplished. You can go back to your kingdom with a clear conscience. I came to ask if you would consider a proposal. Mia froze, her heart skipping erratically. What kind of proposal? James reached into his coat pocket and withdrew an envelope, thick cream paper with an official-looking seal. Adravane has one of the finest education systems in Europe. Our national university offers scholarships to promising international students each year. He extended the envelope toward her. This is an offer of full admission, with all expenses covered. Tuition, housing, living stipend, everything. Mia stared at the envelope, not reaching for it. Why? Because you deserve the chance to pursue your dreams. To see those mountains and oceans you spoke of. To become the teacher you want to be, with a wealth of experiences to share. The offer was beyond anything Mia had ever dared to imagine for herself. Education, travel, opportunity, all packaged in a single envelope. It was too much. Too perfect. Too unbelievable. Is this charity? She asked, her voice barely audible. Because I shared my lunch with a king? James shook his head firmly. This is recognition of potential. The scholarship committee reviewed your academic record and your personal essay. The decision was unanimous. His expression softened. My personal connection to you meant I recused myself from the selection process, but I did hope you would be chosen. Mia finally took the envelope, its weight substantial in her hands. I don't know what to say. You don't have to decide immediately, James assured her. The details are all there, including contact information for the university administration. They can answer any questions you might have. Mia nodded, still stunned. Thank you, she managed. This is overwhelming. I understand. He hesitated, then added, There's something else. A more personal request. She looked up, questioning. I meant what I said in the park that day, about wanting to build something lasting. A lighthouse for those who are lost. He squared his shoulders slightly, suddenly looking every inch the monarch he was. I'm establishing a foundation for orphaned and vulnerable children throughout Europe. Programs for education, housing, healthcare, mentorship, resources I took for granted growing up, but which make all the difference. Mia nodded, understanding beginning to dawn. And I'd like your input, he said simply. Your experiences, your insights. What would have made a difference for you, growing up in the system? What do children like you actually need, not just what administrators think they need? The question touched something deep in Mia. All the nights she had lain awake in various beds, thinking of how things could be better, how the system could be more human, more nurturing. You want my advice? For a royal foundation? James smiled, the familiar dimple appearing in his right cheek. I want your partnership, Mia Bennett. Your wisdom. Your perspective. He gestured to the envelope in her hands. Regardless of whether you accept the scholarship, this offer stands. Your voice matters in this work. Mia looked down at the envelope, then back at James, seeing both the king and the man she had come to know on that park bench. The impossible seemed to be unfolding before her. Education, purpose, a chance to make a difference in lives like her own. I don't know what to say, she repeated, overwhelmed by possibilities she had never allowed herself to consider. Say you'll think about it, James suggested gently. That's all I ask for now, Mrs. Abernathy chose that moment to emerge from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. The shop is closed, Your Majesty, she said, her tone respectful but firm. But if you and Mia would like to continue your conversation, I've just made a fresh pot of tea. James smiled at her, genuine warmth in his expression. "That would be lovely, Mrs. Abernathy, if Mia agrees." Mia looked between them, these two people who had shown her different kinds of kindness, one offering daily sustenance and quiet support, the other challenging her to imagine a bigger life than she had dared to dream. "Tea sounds perfect," she said finally, a tentative smile forming. "I think we have a lot to talk about." Spring arrived in Westbrook with a gentle persistence, green shoots pushing through soil still hard from winter's grip. In Mrs. Abernathy's bakery, windows stood open to catch the mild breeze, and displays featured pastries decorated with fresh flowers and bright colors. Mia moved through the shop with practiced efficiency, her confidence grown in the months since that snowy February evening. Customers greeted her by name now, and she returned their smiles with genuine warmth, no longer guarding herself quite so carefully against connection. "Package for you, Mrs. Abernathy called from behind the counter, pointing to a small box wrapped in simple brown paper. "Came by special courier this morning." Mia wiped her hands on her apron before accepting the package. No return address, but the elegant handwriting was immediately recognizable. She tucked it into her pocket for later, continuing her work with a private smile. That evening, in the small private room Mrs. Abernathy had helped her rent, a vast improvement over the orphanage dormitory, Mia carefully unwrapped the package. Inside lay a journal bound in soft leather, its cover embossed with a simple lighthouse design. A note was tucked between its pages, written in the now familiar hand. "Mia, as you prepare for your journey to Adravane next month, I thought you might like a place to record your thoughts and observations. Your perspective continues to be invaluable to our work with the Foundation. The first Children's Center opens next week. We've incorporated many of your suggestions, particularly regarding creating spaces that feel like homes rather than institutions. Your experiences are helping shape a better future for children who, like you, deserve more than the world has given them. The university is eager to welcome you. Professor Ellington particularly looks forward to having you in her education seminar. She believes your practical insights will balance the theoretical approach of many students. Remember the question I asked you that day in the park? About what you would do if all limitations were removed. You are on your way to answering it now, not because of anything I did, but because you had the courage to share your lunch with a stranger. Never underestimate how far a simple act of kindness can reach. Until we meet again, James." Mia traced her fingers over the lighthouse embossed on the cover, remembering their conversation months ago, something that helps people find their way when they're lost. A lighthouse of sorts. She placed the journal on her small desk, next to the riverstone with its single carved word, "Remember." Outside her window, twilight settled over Westbrook, the first stars appearing in the deepening blue. In a month, she would board a plane for the first time, traveling to a country she had only recently located on a map, to attend a university she had never imagined herself worthy of. The future stretched before her, vast and unknown and full of possibility. But tonight, in this moment, Mia simply allowed herself to feel the journey that had brought her here. From a lonely orphan sharing her meager lunch to a young woman on the cusp of transformation, not because a king had recognized her, but because she had recognized the humanity in a stranger and responded with simple kindness. She opened the journal to its first blank page and began to write, her pen forming words that would become part of a larger story. It began with shared bread on a winter day.